Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started pretty quickly here. I just want to give it another few seconds to see if we have anybody else needing to come in. All right, we'll get started. I am very pleased to welcome today Cynthia Smoot. And this is another one of our sessions here today, Friday. Cynthia is going to be talking to us about talking to your legislators, and we're going to be doing a little bit of back and forth about how to effectively communicate with them. So Cynthia, go ahead and introduce yourself to us, and then just let me know when you want me to move forward on the slides.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Heather. And right off the bat, let me just say it's an honor for me to be included among all of these fabulous speakers that all of you are hearing from in these 5 days. I mean, I was just saying to them that this is like Wild Horse Advocacy 101, one-stop shopping for everything you need to know to really be armed with the information and know how to go forward, especially for those of you who might be new to this issue. But thanks so much to Chris and to Jen and to Heather for putting it together and making it happen. That is no small feat. My name is Cynthia Smoot. I just retired a couple of years ago from my career, a long-time career, 40-some years. We don't have to talk about the details of how many, in the television news business. The last 25 years of my career was at a Tampa, Florida TV station, WTVT, Fox 13, where I was an anchor and features reporter, special projects reporter. So in addition to anchoring newscast, I did a lot of field work in my career, which I was really happy to do because I loved that part of it, because they let me really cover the issues that I wanted to cover. And when I moved to Florida way back in 97, I quickly realized I wanted to be doing stories about wildlife and environmental issues affecting wildlife. And so that became my specialty. I was already a horse person before I moved here, but didn't have much knowledge really about wild horses until the early 2000s. And maybe even like some of you, I happened to see one Sunday night on PBS Nature this amazing documentary called Cloud, Wild Stallion of the Rockies. And I was immediately fascinated, just mesmerized by the photography, the story, and this horse named Cloud, and how he was living with his family in these wild mountains straddling the state of Wyoming and Montana. That was really, I think, maybe the seed that started me on the journey about wild horses, learning more about them. And as I learned more about them, it invariably led me to so many of the issues that I just couldn't come up with the good answers for, because it seemed like there was a constant roundup going on of wild horses and putting them in, warehousing them in short or long-term holding. But I didn't see much going on in terms of solutions, long-term solutions. And of course, in the last few years, we've all seen the inhumane treatment of wild horses in these roundups. So cut to the chase a little bit. I eventually got involved with the Cloud Foundation, and today I'm a board member of the Cloud Foundation. So I've become extremely involved with the group that grew out of that documentary all those years ago. Ginger Catherines was the filmmaker and the founder of the Cloud Foundation, based in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Then I finally made it to the mountain, and in 2016, I made it out there to the Pryors, got to watch wild horses for the first time. And the epiphany of seeing those horses and seeing them living and free and wild, I realized a lot of things about them, and I decided that was when I really needed to get more intensive in my advocacy. The following year, I adopted a wild horse, and she's from Nevada. Her name is Dream, Mustang Dream, and she's my partner in advocacy. So I felt like I needed to have somebody, a horse, to help me walk the walk along with the talk. It also led me to other people that I've met, many of them who are doing some of these speaking engagements for you this weekend, but it led me to my path to Capitol Hill. And like many of you, if you haven't done this, I can remember back my first trip up to Capitol Hill. Now, as a reporter, I interview legislators all the time, but this time I was going as a wild horse advocate and layperson, and it was a bit intimidating. So part of what I want to share with you today really is the fact that you could do this, that these legislators, don't forget, work for you. We pay their salaries. We pay the salaries of everybody in their office. We keep the lights on. And it is not as hard as you think to start developing a relationship, even if it's not with that legislator, his or herself, but with a member of the staff and somebody critical on that staff that can get your foot in the door and that you two can become a resource in that you've got information, important information about this issue. Because the other thing that I found, and is still the case today, especially in the states where there are no wild horses, is that this is a subject very few of our legislators know very much about. They typically just vote the party line, whatever that is, told to them by their leadership, because they don't know, they don't understand. And so somebody has to fill in the blanks of all that information they're getting from the Bureau of Land Management. And they get a lot because the BLM sends out hundreds of press releases every year, not to mention the documentation that they are sending to the legislators and budget requests, et cetera. And I can guarantee you that in most of this, the narrative is always the same, which is too many wild horses, they're eating all of the forage, and we need to reduce the population, and never any thought given to the other part of the situation, which of course is public grazing. So all of that being said, let's go ahead and put up the first slide here, if you would, Heather, because there's just a one way to start, and it's so easy, which is if you don't know who your legislator is, and of course, you know, no matter what state you live in, you still can speak up for America's wild horses. They are federally protected by the 1971 law. We all have a stake in this, whether we live in a state with wild horses or not, because we all pay, all our taxes go for the budget of the DOI and the BLM and all those horses and everything that happens to them. So you have members of your House of Representatives, and that's according to the state population, and then you have 2 senators. So if you don't know who your legislator is, your House person and your senators, that number right there is one you should jot down. It is the U.S. Capitol Switchboard. And all you have to do for your phone call is you call in, you say, I live in zip code, whatever it is in this state, and that switchboard operator will get you to the right office. So that it would be the easiest way to do that. Okay, just a few little tips here and there. First of all, be polite, be friendly, be respectful. One of the things I found out when I went to Capitol Hill for the first time, I realized when I was making these phone calls that these people sounded very young. But I also realized sometimes that isn't always the case, because the older we get, the younger everybody looks, right? So in going to the offices, though, actually spending some time walking around Capitol Hill and meeting various officials, what I found is that by and large, the people who answer the phones, male and female, at any of these offices are interns. They are either in college, about to finish college, or they just finished college, and they are there on an internship. They're likely not paid staff. Occasionally they might be, but quite often it's an intern. They are likely as nervous as you are because they get yelled and screamed at a lot. It's kind of shocking to me, but almost every single intern that I spoke with who answers the phone says they get really nasty phone calls a lot. And it, you know, that's not a nice thing. So we always want to take the high road. We want to be that friendly person. One of the things I do is first thing I say is, hey, this is Cynthia Smoot. I live in zip code 33715 in Florida. And who's this I'm speaking to today? Regina. Hi, Regina. Hey, what's the weather doing there today? I heard it's been pretty cold in DC. Do you have a lot of snow? Icebreaker. Just just by asking that person how their day's going, a little something that maybe throws them off just a little bit from going right for what you want, that often will set up just a friendlier atmosphere and kind of humanizes you to them. So you're more likely to get what you ask for. So now you're going to tell them, I have some concerns about an issue affecting America's wild horses and burros. And I'd really like to speak to the person who handles that. Do you have a staff member who handles that? Sometimes it depends on the office. That might be a legislative staffer aide who handles natural resources. It can be different for each office. So you ask for that person. Sometimes you'll actually get them on the phone. I would say more likely they're going to say, oh, they'll need to call you back. Or can I get an email? And we'll hit the email thing here. But first of all, if that aide's not available, go ahead and say, well, let me give you the message I have for today. Let's say it's a specific piece of legislation. So let's say you're calling Dina Titus in the last year and a half. And I don't know if this has been reintroduced yet. So maybe Heather or someone can weigh in and let me know that. But Dina Titus introduced a bill, the Wild Horse Protection Act of 2024. And basically the goal of that bill is to end the helicopter roundups. So let's say I was calling last year about that specific bill. So I would say, I'm asking Congresswoman, whatever her name is, to please support this bill that's been introduced by Dina Titus. If it's a member of the same party, one of the things you can say is, I know it's being supported by Congressperson this, Congressperson that. Little homework will tell you those things. So there's always, so you already have some people of that person's party that are signing on. In some cases, you might be asking them to co-sponsor the legislation. I've certainly asked for that. The more co-sponsors, the better, the more likely that bill is to move forward. But anyhow, what you're doing first is you're just trying to get that person, the right person that you need to get to. And so you say, please deliver my message. And I may also have that person's email, okay? If you are speaking to the aide, and the aide has certain questions and you don't have the answer, no problem. Don't worry about that. You're going to let that person know that you're going to get that information for them. You're going to be the resource. And then you find the answer. And of course, as always, be sure to use legitimate sources for that. So all sources are not equal. Let me tell you that. For being in the news business, I know that. If you can, I don't know, can you roll up a little bit there or ask the aide or receptionist for his or her email? I'm not sure if that's showing the whole way, but anyhow, there you go. Then you follow up that phone call with an email, especially if you have talked to that aide. You get that aide's personal email. You never want just a congressman at this.gov. You want somebody's name. Always more effective if you're using somebody's name. You thank them for their time. You go over the points of why you called. And then you do the ask again, which is, we would love to see Congresswoman so-and-so co-sponsor this bill, support this bill. Please let them know if there's any other information that you need that we're available. I'm going to put up here, we can go to the next page, Heather, and this is just, this is almost a little bit maybe too basic, but this is a sample script. So let's say I'm answering the phone. Okay, so the staffer says, hello, how can I help you? And I say, hi, I'm Cynthia Smoot. I live at 3371, and I'm calling today to urge my representative to take action on America's wild horses and burro. And then you state the issue. I would say, especially if you're calling, and so you need to be in real time, have those things jotted down. Know what it is you want to say. You don't have to do it verbatim. I don't think you really want to sound like you're reading from a script. I think it always sounds that way. But maybe just write down a few little bullet points there so you know exactly what you want to say. It's right there in front of you, no problem. And then you make your ask, whatever it may be. In this case, it says, please support legislation like the SAFE Act, which would end the slaughter of American horses. And the SAFE Act, we could talk about that if anybody wants to, maybe in the questions. Here's the other thing. If you have anything personal to relate, include that. If you are a volunteer, say, for a rescue organization, and your rescue group has actually gotten in some wild horses, you know, a horse that has the freeze brand, and that horse ended up in a bad place, such as a kill pen or neglected or whatever, and it ends up with your rescue. That's personal experience, and you can speak to that. And that's very powerful testimony that will automatically make ears perk up a little more. Certainly, if you've been out to observe wild horses, as so many of you have, you can also speak to that. You've been out personally to the herd management area. You've seen this. If you've been to a roundup, doesn't get much more dramatic than that in terms of an experience level. If you've actually seen what happens at a roundup, that gives you eyewitness firsthand experience that automatically should take your email or your phone call to the top of the list. And then you do the ask. Can we ask that Congresswoman Jane Doe, will she help us with this? Will she co-sponsor or support this when it goes to a vote? Quite often, they're not going to tell you that off right then. They're going to say, we'll have to get back to you. We'll take this under advisement. You know, also you take a few notes along the way. That doesn't help. I know sometimes that can be tough, but one of the other things too is that you ask for the response, you take a few notes, and there's the end of your phone call. Of course, at the end of your phone call, and we can move on, Heather, if you want, is just you just are very respectful. You say, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate that. And if you speak to that aide, you follow up with an email. And that's what we're going to talk about now, is emails. And as I mentioned earlier, instead of just a generic email, which you might find, say, on your congressperson's website, always better if you can at least make the call to find out who that staffer is that handles that issue, so you know it goes directly to that person. When you do your subject line on your email, make it very specific. Say, this is just an example, support for the Wild Horse Protection Bill of 2024. So be very specific. I would even say maybe just put it all in caps just to make sure they see it and don't discount it. Same rules apply after that. Identify yourself as a constituent, put your name, your zip code at the top, because that way they immediately identify you as someone they work for, someone who's voting in their district. You're a constituent, okay? Again, including any personal experience you might have. And that's a really powerful way to get a legislator's attention, is if you have something personal to add on why you care about this issue and what you'd like to see happen. Use facts to make your points. Avoid flowery and emotional. By that, I mean, one of the things that I hear a lot in some of the television stories that I've done over the years, which I understand because the reporters always are looking for the emotional part of a story. But it will be quite often, say, a photographer who's been taking photos of this particular herd for years and has a vested interest in that herd. And so the story pops up as I love these horses. They're so beautiful. I come out to take pictures all the time. That's all great, but that is not going to get you anywhere with your legislators, okay? You really need to use facts and concrete items. You want to make sure that you're talking to them on an adult level about something, an issue that's critical, and it's a taxpayer issue. Let's not forget, this is a taxpayer issue as well. I urge you to proofread your email before you hit that send. Don't use all caps in the body of your email. That's the same as like screaming at someone in a text. Don't use a lot of exclamation points. A period will do. But check your grammar, check your spelling, keep it concise and short, because they go through thousands of emails a day, and you want to make sure that yours actually gets read. Okay, we can move on to the next page, because after that, now you're getting into the groove, right? So now you're going to ask for a meeting in person or virtual. And quite honestly, depending on where you live, asking for an in-person meeting can be a high bar because, Washington, D.C. is a long ways away. And for budget reasons or whatever, you just aren't going to be able to go to Washington. So virtual is something that, like what we're doing today, it's quite possible. And I would say I have many virtual meetings with legislative staff. It makes it easy for us and for them if I can't be there in person. Here's the big thing. Prepare before you make your request. And by that, I mean, research who your lawmaker is and understand a little bit about that person, what his or her priorities are, what their voting record is, whether they've had any past involvement in the wild horse issue. That's information that you can find usually on their website or somewhere else. And just do a little bit of homework, do a little Googling around and find out, because that's also something that you can add to your text is, I know that Congresswoman Doe has voted for this and supported this bill in the past. So we're asking to continue in that vein. So it gives you an idea that maybe this person could be an ally or could be looking favorably at what you're going to ask. Clarify what your goals are, what you want to discuss, what you're expecting the outcome to be, whether you want them to co-sponsor a bill, vote for it, or if you're just simply, making them aware of a situation. And these days, of course, in the issue of wild horses and burros, there's a lot to make them aware of, especially in the budgetary arena, et cetera, because we have a whole new Congress. And some of those people, well, first of all, a lot of them, if they're new members, they're going to hire a whole new staff. So in some cases, you're starting out from scratch with people who really know nothing, and you're going to help fill in some of the details for them. Make sure that you've got your information. I would say come up with like a one-page fact sheet that you can carry with you and have copies of, so that if you go to a meeting, that you'll actually have that to leave behind. And that it has like your key points, statistics, that sort of thing. And then, of course, you always want to make sure that, let's see, where's my next page here? Your supporting material with your documents. If it's virtual, what you can do is say, hey, I've got some information here that I would like to send to you. And then you can, send it in a PDF file, email it. But I would say you follow up in some way. So put together just a little ask for a meeting thing here. This next slide, if we go to it, is just how to basically, it's like kind of like the script to go through it. So, okay, you find out who the scheduler is. Okay, that's a critical point too, because in every congressional office, Senate and House, you have somebody who sets the meetings. And when you're asking for a meeting, it's important that you get to the scheduler. Easy to find out who that is. If you already have a relationship with a legislative aide, you can ask that person, or you can call the office and ask who the scheduler is for your member of Congress or Senate. And they will give you that name, and that's who you are going to send this request to. And so here's a sample email script. My name is this. I'm a constituent reaching out to discuss whatever it might be. In this case, it was Protecting America's Horses and the SAFE Act. Then you say why. You give 2 lines on why this is a critical issue and why you need to bring this to your member of Congress's attention. Then you just go ahead and do the ask. Let me know what works for you. And then, I don't know about the I'm available in just a few dates. I think if you're asking for a meeting with a member of Congress or an aide, I think you just say, let me know what works best for you. And maybe in the next 2 weeks at the end of March, maybe just give them a little bit of a timeline, and then find out what they say. They'll come back to you, hopefully, and give you some slots. The other possibility too is that for a personal meeting is everybody goes home to their districts at different times of the year. They're all in DC right now, but every member of Congress, every senator will go home at different times during the year for for days off. They'll take a few days off, a long weekend. They have time built in that they go home, and there'll be district time. And there is a chance that you could possibly try to get a meeting at that time when your person is home in his or her district. And especially if it's more of a lull, of a downtime, I would say when things are not so hot and heavy, you have to kind of gauge what's going on in Congress and whether they're all tied up in something that you know you're not going to get attention for right then. So maybe look for a lull point. I'm not sure if we'll have one of those anytime soon, but we could see. Okay, go ahead to the next page here, and let's say you get that meeting. Pardon me, let me just have a little drink of water here. Let's say you get that meeting. First of all, let me give you the reality. Typically, any meeting that I've had on Capitol Hill has been slated for 15 minutes. Some of them have gone on to be 30 minutes because they started asking a lot of questions. And I suppose they didn't have anybody breathing down their neck. But quite normally, they stack their days pretty tightly. So you need to plan on really getting what you need to convey in that 15 to 30 minute time frame. So this would be saying if you're going to get the 30 minutes. So like, let's say this is a Zoom, and I would say find out in advance what they're going to give you in terms of time, because you might need to condense this, okay? But first of all, you just do your little introduction, who you are, what district you're in. You give them the state, the purpose of why you're there, whatever that may be, whether it's a specific issue or whether it's just wild horses in general. Here's an example: the Bureau of Land Management removing thousands of wild horses right now, and we really need a humane alternative to these helicopter roundups. One of the things that you can really also be armed with is some of the information about how costly, not just the inhumane treatment of the horses and some of the things that we've seen happen with these roundups, but if you can have the dollars and cents figures also, that can often get the attention. I mean, just to give you an example, I wrote down just a few little facts and figures here for you. Since 2006, okay, this is just the money that has been paid to helicopter contractors, the people who fly the helicopters to do the roundups. $53,000 since 2006. And I'm sure that figure has gone up, because that figure, I believe, has only is from a couple of years ago. I'm sure that number has gone up now. $87 million, the cost of short-term holding since 2010. And that figure, like I said, is from a couple of years ago. That figure has gone up. Long-term holding, $333 million for long-term holding since 2004. Even if you don't have wild horses in your state, tax dollars matter. The budget matters to everybody. So you surely can be able to get some information or get their attention that way. So then you clearly state what it is you want your legislator to do. You're asking for their support. Once again, we can go on to the next slide here. If they seem to hesitate or they have a question that you can't answer, you just basically say, look, I don't have the answer to that. I'm going to get it for you, and then I'm going to follow up. And you do that. You're asking them to support the issue. They may be uncomfortable with that. I would say that that's to be expected. Quite often, you're just not going to get any kind of nod or yes to anything right off the bat. They'll say they'll keep it under advisement, or they'll talk to the legislator about it. Even if you hear something that you disagree with or that really bugs you during that meeting, whether it's virtual or in person, you stay polite, you stay professional, okay? Then you wrap the whole thing up. They'll wrap it up, believe you me, if you don't. So you just say, okay, appreciate your time, glad that you've been able to go over this with us. You offer to send them follow-up information, and then you be sure to email them and thank them for their time. And when you do that, maybe just hit your points again. You go through with that next email that you're sending in person to each person that you met. Be sure you get that information before you leave, and you get back to them and let them know the information they were seeking. here's what I found out for you. Here's what we're trying to do. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do for you. And you thank them for their time. And what you're really doing, if you go on to the next slide here, is the goal of all of this, really, the goal of all of this is to make you a resource on wild horses for your legislators. We cannot presume that they know as much as you think they know. You just can't, especially if they don't have wild horses in their states. Don't assume they know that much. Most of what they get is from press releases and from the BLM. So by being professional, courteous, respectful, and knowledgeable, I mean, I actually have staffers now that email me when they have a question about a certain bill. Now, they are asking my opinion. I mean, and I'm sure they're getting others, but I can tell you, if you get to the point where a staffer is asking you your opinion on a piece of horse legislation that they're unfamiliar with, you know, hey, you're in. I mean, you have done what you set out to do, is making yourself a resource for this information. So I threw in a little quote here at the end because I know this is a lot of information, and sometimes for as much as we call and email and write, etc., that we feel like maybe this is just not getting through. Eleanor Roosevelt, who I quite admire, once, she's got a lot of good quotes, but this one I thought was germane to this conversation, and it is, you must do the things you think you cannot do, because it takes as much energy to wish it as it does to plan. So for all of the things that we sit around and go, okay, I just don't know if I can do this, I think what Eleanor's telling us is just do it. Just go ahead and do it. And you'll find that you too can be a great resource. So there you go. And I will take any questions about media, legislation. There are so many good people on here, like Chris, who's one of the moderators who certainly knows a lot about dealing with legislators. And so if she wants to chime in at any time, I would be glad to hear what she has to say. But anyhow, there you go. And thanks so much for allowing me to make this presentation today. And so I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Cynthia. You just helped to point out just how easy it is to actually develop a relationship with legislators and their staff members. And that is just so important. And as Chris knows, it's key to making any changes that we want to make. I did reach out to a couple of advocates that I'm friends with who I know have been holding in-person and Zoom meetings with their legislators in their states. One of them is my friend Diane Tudis from Indiana, and she often tries to get meetings with her legislators on the federal level. And a couple of the questions that she has received in the past, and I know others have as well, is if I'm a legislator, why should my office care if I am from a state with no wild horses or burros? Why are you trying to tell me about this if we have no wild horses here?
Okay, well, that one's easy because as a taxpayer, we all pay for this. We all pay for this, and we pay millions and millions of dollars to watch helicopters fly and round up and sometimes, of course, injure, maim, and kill our wild horses. So that speaks to the inhumane treatment. But at the end of the day, you have a program, a policy that spends a lot of taxpayers' dollars, and not in a wise way. Okay, because we all pay for this, but what do we get for it? What we get is a constant warehouse, and we get more horses taken off the range where they cost us zero. Okay, the clock starts ticking and the meter starts running. The second they start putting together the plan for the roundup, and then the second that the first truck shows up and the helicopters take flight, the meter starts running on how much, the millions and millions of dollars that are spent to do nothing but basically round up and warehouse wild horses. There's a better way. There is a more tax efficient, cheaper way with on the range population control with PZP, which we know is safe and reversible. So the money part of it, especially in today's climate where we now actually have like a federal office or something that's talking about wasteful spending, this is wasteful spending at its nth cause here. So I think the money part of it, that and the fact that, the wild horse, other than the American bald eagle, is the only other animal that has this federally protected status in the United States. So these animals truly are icons of our pioneer days of the West, part of our national heritage. So to me, those are both two good reasons why every legislator should care whether they have wild horses in their districts or not.
Another question that I know a lot of advocates get is, aren't the wild horses starving on the range?
Yeah, that's a good one. That one is easy to dispel if you just show them the pictures and the video. And there's never been more more visual evidence of the horses that are coming in, that are being rounded up and what they look like. I mean, today, everybody has one of these in their hand, okay? Everybody has this, has a camera. And that's in addition to the professional photographers and the news photographers that go out and document these roundups. So we see the conditions, we see the body scores. I know for a fact that the BLM has changed its language mid roundup when horses started coming in, because part of the reason given by the BLM was that it was poor body score, poor body condition for lack of forage. And then when the horses started coming in and they were all fat and happy, it was like, oh, no. Then it came down. Then they switched the reasoning. Like, seriously, I mean, that happens. So different press release goes out mid roundup with a different reason for rounding them up.
All right, last question before I'll hit the questions in the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want my office to do to help you today?
Oh gosh, there's so much. I think that's very specific about what's going on at that moment. So that's when it helps to be tied in and know what exactly you want to ask for. If there's a bill out there that we desperately need to get to a vote, it can take a long time to ever get a bill anywhere close to the floor for a vote. The fact is that most bills never make it anywhere. They die, and then the next Congress comes in and that bill has to start all over again. So it's a long climb. It's like one foot in front of the other, climbing a tall mountain. So if we're working on a specific bill that we think will make a difference, that is something that is a very specific ask. Otherwise, I think, maybe you become your area of expertise. Let's say if you're in finance, okay, let's say that's your skill set, okay? You're an accountant, you work in bookkeeping, that sort of thing. Well, then maybe you start drilling down on the dollars and cents of the Wild Horse and Burro program and take a look. All this information, by the way, is available. Some of it we've had to FOIA, send a Freedom of Information request, and they don't give those over easily either. But a lot of the information is actually right there on the BLM website, and you just have to know where to look for it. So I would say whatever your area is that you are interested in or that you have expertise in, you drill down into that, and then you talk about that with your legislator, because maybe that's an area you're comfortable in, and you can honestly say, how is it we're spending this when PZP costs $30 a dose? You have these organizations here that are already using it, that are more than willing to train volunteers to do this. I mean, when you start adding up the monies and seeing where the dollars are going, it becomes quite frustrating. And I would think most legislators are interested in how much this is going to cost and how much this is costing, if nothing else.
And just to reiterate, Cynthia, that legislators don't know, right?
Right.
Like, it's our job to tell them. And
That's
if
right.
we have 435 members of
Mhm.
House of Representatives and 100
Mhm.
senators, I would say maybe at most, maybe 20
Mhm.
actually know what's going on. And I always refer back to having Representative David Schweikert at our conference in DC in 2023, and he stood there in front of us. Number one, he expressed his disdain for the Bureau of Land Management. So keep that in mind.
Mhm.
Our legislators don't necessarily like what the Bureau of Land Management is doing to our wild horses. But he also made a point to say, you know what, guys, it's not my job to go around and talk to my 434 fellow members of the House and tell them what's happening. It's your job as constituents to tell them.
Yeah, yeah, and I also get why that's really overwhelming sometimes. And if you haven't done it, and for those of you who might be listening who've never done this, I understand it can feel really intimidating at first. But once you get over that initial phone call, that initial email, especially that initial meeting, you'll find it's not as scary as you think it's going to be. Okay. And also it will give you the confidence to then go ahead and take it to the next level and continue and start building on, building on your confidence, building on your layer of knowledge, your base of knowledge about this. And it's a great feeling, and it's a really good feeling, when you get a question from a legislative aide who wants your input on something. We just can't take for granted that they are getting timely information, the correct information. For instance, and I've been doing a lot with a print journalist friend of mine named Vickery Eckhoff. And one of the things that she and I do is we are trying really hard. It's not easy to change the narrative, the often false narrative around wild horses. Like you mentioned, aren't they starving on the range? Aren't they eating all the forage? Aren't they like breeding out of control? And those BLM press releases that come out never mention in any of these herd management areas or HMA how many cattle or sheep are eating there as well. And we know now from scientific research, we actually know from the BLM's own data that had to be collected through FOIA by Peer. And you're going to be hearing, I think, from Chandra at Peer on Monday. That would definitely be worth listening to. Peer did a study and released all the figures that they got from the BLM. The number one cause of damage to the range, which is what they always say is the reason why they're rounding up, or quite often the reason why they're rounding up too many horses, excess is the word. But the number one reason for the range damage is livestock. You're never going to read that in a press release ever. You're never going to hear anything about sheep and cattle in a BLM press release. They will not even acknowledge it.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I'm going to answer this question, but Wendy is asking if there's a way to get BLM press releases. There are.
Yes,
The best
yes.
thing to do is just Google BLM press releases. I do it. I keep that tab pinned on my Google bar. But what I did notice, and I think I mentioned yesterday, was that the BLM has actually not put out a press release now since January 16th. So
Mm.
there was some sort of order that went out to the Forest Service, I know specifically, but it probably went out to BLM as well, that no press releases were to be issued right now. But if you do go to the BLM press release site, you're technically supposed to be able to put in your email address and then receive an email for each press release. Although I have tried that 2 or 3 times now and have found that it never works. So I just keep that tab pinned on my Google bar and I refer to it every couple of days. And a really good reason to watch BLM press releases would be to look for any new environmental assessment or public comment periods that they're putting out on a proposed new roundup in a certain area. So that is something I do recommend that everybody should do.
Exactly.
Somebody's asking if there's any new legislation on tap for 2025 that we should be speaking on. You asked about the Wild Horse Protection Act, and I did take a quick look. It does not look like it's been reintroduced for this year. It's a little early, you guys. With the new members of Congress just having come in earlier this month, and they're busy doing confirmation hearings and so forth. I know some bills have been introduced. I talked about one on my Facebook page yesterday about Utah. But we should start looking for those. And as we see those, we will make them available for you guys and let you know, give you a script that you
Mm-hmm.
can call your representative or your senator with and um, tell them whether you want them to support that bill or not. So we'll move forward with that.
Exactly. We
Also, I
know
just,
that and many of you know about the Save Our Forgotten Equines SAFE Act That is
Yeah.
going to be reintroduced soon, so look for that. For those of you who don't know what the SAFE Act is, the SAFE Act would basically put an end to the slaughter of American horses by banning the export. Even though we do not have slaughter slaughter in this country, and let's hope it stays that way, because you never know, with the brand new Congress. But right now, the reason that American horses, including our wild horses, way too many wild horses are ending up in these kill pens and ending up in Mexico and Canada being slaughtered, is because they get exported, and that's not illegal. So the SAFE Act would finish off the horse slaughter issue and would not allow them to be exported for the purpose of slaughter for human consumption. And that is, I believe, going to be reintroduced in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and what it is, I just want to remind everybody that when you do call your legislators on a bill, always include the bill number, because you
Yes.
actually wouldn't believe just how many SAFE Act bills there are each year. They'll use the exact same abbreviation, but it's best to give them you can say the SAFE Act, but stretch it out to Save America's Equines or however it's worded, but also include that bill number, which will start with an HR for the House of Representatives or with an S for the Senate. And just make sure you include that bill number each and every time. And you can look up those bill numbers simply by going to congress.gov. And there's a
Yes.
search bar there. So if you
Yeah.
put in the SAFE Act or you put in Wild Horse Protection Act, make sure that the one that you pull up is for the current legislative session, because these bills are introduced and expire every 2 years. And every bill that we had out last year expired on December 31st of 2024. So you want to make sure that the bill that you're looking at says 2025 to 2026. All right, let's see if we have any other quick questions here. A lot of great feedback on your presentation there, Cynthia.
Oh,
So
thank
thank
you. Appreciate that.
you.
I, I
What
feel
is
like
the
I was
name of
just
the
kind of, yeah, I felt like I was just kind of like spewing all this information out. But anyhow, I hope somebody found it to be helpful. So in any way, so.
Oh no, God, it was all just, I always refer to this as Wild Horse 101. I mean, even if we've heard it
Mhm.
before, it's always super
Yeah.
helpful for us to hear it again. But I do feel like we have a lot of new advocates on these presentations for this summit. So no, I think everything you did
Okay.
was absolutely perfect. I don't know if you know this one or not from Jeanette. What is the name of the committee that allows bills to the House of Representative and Senate?
Hmm.
I think there's a committee so much as a representative or a senator can choose to introduce a bill and sponsor it. Yes.
Well, each, so there are committees and subcommittees within each House of Congress, on the Senate side, on the House side. And some of those committees do have sway over certain bills, depending on what it affects. So yes, so you could, I mean, one of the important things you can find out, especially if this bill, is affecting certain, and like, let's say your legislator is a member of a committee or a subcommittee, that gives you something to talk about right there, because then you could approach that person based on that as a member of this. So that I guess that's what she's asking, because you have, I'm not sure there's like one committee per se. It's just there's different committees for natural resources, for the budget, et cetera.
Yeah, and a bill is usually introduced by an individual, and I know Chris wants
Yes.
to chime in here. And then sometimes that bill will go to a committee before it goes to a full floor vote. So, Chris, what was your question?
Um, I know here in North Dakota, and a lot of times what happens at a state level also happens at a federal level. So there's probably a similar process. But when we introduced the legislation that we just did, we have two different pieces. And the legislator who sponsored both pieces was hoping they would both go, like we can get them in the same committee the same day. I think that when it goes to their legal counsel, they decide based on what's in the bill, what committee it should be assigned to. So in our case, both of our pieces of legislation went to two different committees. So it just depends on what it is, or like what the meat of the bill is, or if it goes to
Mhm.
natural resources appropriations, what may be.
Yeah, exactly. And I know, Cynthia, you mentioned earlier about talking to the aides, and then they would
Mhm.
sway their representative or their senator, their boss. Somebody
Yeah.
is asking a question and she's saying that her House representative or all the House representatives in Maryland co-sponsored the SAFE Act last time.
Mhm.
But how does she get her representative to then talk to her senators about sponsoring the SAFE Act on the Senate side?
Uh, that's interesting because I really don't know how much interaction there is. That's a really good question. I don't really know. You know, my understanding is that so I've been told that they don't gather around the water hole, the bar, the way they used to. Back in the old days when everybody fraternized, you know, the Dems and the Republicans would get together and all have drinks at the end of the day. I don't think that happens anymore. I think it's very bitterly divided up there. So unless it's the same party, you know, especially if they're different parties, then there may not be any kinds of communications, which is why it's even more behooves us that we have to address all three offices, our representative and our two senators. And that's like three different offices that you need to make those relationships with. I'm sorry to tell you that, folks, but that's the way it works, you know. Instead of just your House rep, you need to also be cultivating that with your Senate side as well. And that's the best thing that I know to tell you. Now, if, say, your representative it has supported that legislation in the past, well, that's an in for you. Like in Maryland, for instance, if your representative and your senators have all supported the SAFE bill, then I'm guessing they are going to sign on when the new one is. But if you happen to notice, like let's say a week goes by and you don't see them doing that, you can certainly call and write and say, hey, you know, I know that you did this before. Are you planning to? And quite often they will tell you if they, oh yes, so-and-so is co-signed, it just hasn't shown up yet. I've been told that on a number of cases. And I don't know what the lag time is on it showing up publicly. It's on the website versus, you know, once they actually do it. But yeah, you have to treat each office individually. And the Senate side is separate from the House side. I think most of you probably know that. And it's a long distance in between. And I'm not so sure there's a lot of fraternization that goes on anymore.
I know you mentioned the SAFE Act earlier, and I'm going to throw this question at you, and I hope I don't catch you off guard a little bit. But you know, a lot of people will tell me that they've contacted their representative or senator on the SAFE Act, and one of the biggest questions they get is, what's going to happen to all those horses who are currently being shipped to slaughter? And what would your reply be?
I would need to kind of drill down on the numbers a little bit, but I know that that one of the groups that has really studied this has been Animal Wellness Action and Wayne Pacelli. He used to be head of HSUS. And I don't know if Britta Hessla is on this Zoom right now, but she's coming up. And she
She
would be
is, yeah.
she would be an maybe you want to jot that question down for her because she's quite involved legislatively with the lobby on Capitol Hill. But the bottom line is the numbers are not nearly what they used to be. We're right down now to about 22,000. That's not a lot of horses every year, but it's still a very cruel ending. And there's a lot of suffering in these kill pens for those horses that still end up there. You know, from what I understand, the answer really is that we have enough rescue and sanctuary in this country for those horses to be there. And some of it's going to come back to personal responsibility. I mean, the racing industry, the harness industry, the Tennessee walking industry, the farming community in Pennsylvania, they will then have to make decisions about livestock that right now it's easy to get $100 and stick your horse down at the kill pen. And
Yeah.
you know, I watched a video yesterday of 20 some horses that arrived at a certain rescue. And it bothered me greatly that I would say at least a third to a half of those horses all had some kind of severe physical problem. Some of them were so bad off that they had to be humanely euthanized right there. This is something that should not be happening. You know, we have humane standards and we have laws on the books for our dogs and cats. We wouldn't be doing this to our dogs. We wouldn't be
No,
doing this
no,
to our dogs.
no. We need a
We
federal animal cruelty law more than I can say. I mean, it
Yeah,
just, we
yeah.
need.
And so just because it's a horse, the idea that you send it with a broken leg and somehow that's okay. So we don't have enforcement, you know, and that's also one of the issues. I mean, quite honestly, some of these animals, that person should be charged for dumping their horse with a broken leg at a one of these auctions, because if you're not going to treat that broken leg, then that horse needs to be euthanized. So, you know, there you go. But I wish I had better information for you, but I know that Britta and I know Animal Wellness Action, if you go to their website, they have some good information there about that.
And I like to point out backyard breeders too. I mean, while my husband and I were RV traveling and from 2020 to 2022, you know, we would be driving around and I'd just see a pasture full of mares and foals. And, you know, the only reason that they're there is that the person who owned the property was bringing in a stallion, breeding every single one of those mares, taking the babies, and then those horses are getting dumped at auction. And it's a vicious circle, and they're doing it just to make a few bucks. And so I like to say, well, it would force backyard breeders to stop operating because they'll have
Exactly.
nowhere to dump all these horses at. So that cruel issue of backyard breeding would disappear. It might take a few years for it to even out. But yeah, Britta, I do hope you'll maybe cover this issue later in your session. Okay, I just want to do a couple more quick questions and then I'll let you go,
Okay.
Cynthia.
Okay.
This one I do want to ask though, because it's, you know, Wyoming, although McCulloch Peaks is my heart herd, Salt Wells Creek is my second heart herd. And with the upcoming roundup in July where they effectively want to zero out the herd, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. How can we, this is from Nancy, how can we effectively counter grazing associations like the one in Rock Springs in Wyoming?
That's so tough.
I
So
know.
tough. I mean, because you know, that's a special interest group that's quite powerful.
But yet
You
it's only a few families, right? Like it's
know,
15
yeah,
families, I think.
yeah. Um, Okay, so this is the media me talking, okay? And this is the kind of, you know, the kind of advice I've been giving to people who are trying to call attention to this. You know, you especially have herds that people visit. You know, the thing that bothered me so much about the McCullough Peaks herd, I think that's the one. Was that the one that just had the roundup last year? And
Yeah, they did the bait and trap last January and the 1-year-old
yeah.
filly cat
Okay, but
died.
isn't there a little town around there that they actually run wild horse tours out of, et cetera?
Cody, Wyoming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Cody. Okay. So, you know, my point being that, you know, quite often wild horses are not getting the credit that they deserve for the dollars they bring into their communities from photographers, tourists, people who just want to see wild horses. And so we as a collective need to do a better job of putting a dollar figure on what that means to our economies. For instance, in Cody, when I was researching this last year, because I was trying to help in a few little ways there were like two different groups that made a living in taking people out to see the wild horses. You have local motels, especially not the chains, but the mom and pops. You have gas stations, you have convenience stores, you have restaurants, you possibly have a visitors bureau, chambers of commerce. Need to be targeting the people that are in touch with the purse strings and making a case for our wild horses having value that make a difference for the community. And I think that's how we start to try to make a few inroads into more people caring about them and what happens than just those of us who love wild horses and love the public lands and the, you know, the land they stand on. So we need to be looking for ways to connect them financially to the parts that are meaningful to keep wild horses there and not remove them. Especially if it's just at the behest of a few landowners. And I will say this too, and one of the things that I've had this conversation with about is we blame the BLM a lot for things. I mean, the BLM is definitely, the agency that gets the vitriol, but we don't see much about the actual people with the grazing permits that they're doing it at the behest of. I think we should remember that there are matters of public record and that one of them is the grazing permits. I believe that those are matters of public record. I may be wrong about that. Someone correct me. But as long as you are dealing with the truth and the facts and open records, I'm just going to say to you that that's open for publication.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly find out the name of the grazing allotments. I have yet to figure out how to figure out the name of who owns the grazing allotment, but it is something I've researched in the past. And,
Yeah.
My very good friend Sandy Sharkey, we started this whole thing about awareness, and she was in Cody, Wyoming. I think it was year before last. And
Yes.
everywhere she went, every store that she went into, the restaurant, the places she was staying, she told every single person, I'm here in Cody spending money at your shop or your restaurant or your hotel because I'm here to see wild horses. I'm not here to go over to Yellowstone. I'm specifically here to go photograph the horses of McCulloch Peaks. And that's something I brought up about a year ago with everybody during the McCulloch Peaks Roundup. And that is no matter where you go to see wild horses, any of the businesses that you go into, tell them I'm specifically here to see and photograph the wild horses and spend time with the wild horses. And that is why I am spending money in your restaurant today. That is
Yes.
why I am buying this tie-dye t-shirt. So if we can
Exactly.
all start doing
Exactly.
that, then it tells and she did get some pushback from one or two of the people, but she just spoke to them for a few minutes and told them, and that's something that all of us can do every time we
Right.
go out to see horses. And so I started doing that last year in June and
Yeah.
October.
As far as I
And
know, no one comes out and pays any money to watch cows and sheep graze. They will spend their dollars to come see wild horses in the wild.
Yeah.
So I think, and this is something I do think about a lot, and I'm open to any and all ideas, and we can talk about it, but we need to find a better way to capitalize on the economic value of our natural resources. In this case, one of our natural resources being also one of our federally protected animals, which is the wild horse and burro.
Yep, exactly. Yep, precisely. All right. Yeah, and I just want to mention too, when I go out to the range, I like to be out there for 8 or 10 hours a day. And sometimes I'll go out with people who also like to do a bit of shopping. So I did visit Cody, and took my friends Victoria and Carol there on separate trips. And when they're not with me out on the range, they do go walk the town.
Of
Or they'll
course.
go
Yeah,
to a bar. But the number one
that's
thing
right.
that they talk to about with
Exactly.
everybody is the
Yeah,
wild horses. They'll
that's
strike up
exactly.
conversations at the bar. They'll go to the local tourist office and say, do you have any brochures on wild horses? Can I make some and bring some to you? My friend Heather makes some. Can I have her print them and send them to you? So this is
Yeah,
stuff that all of us can do when we visit these towns to just help bring awareness. So,
right.
all right.
And I wish I'd had a better answer for, the Rock Springs Grazing Association, but that is its own giant issue there in Wyoming. And I unfortunately do not have any good answers for that particular one. I will tell you that Eric Mulvar, who you're going to hear from on Monday, he's very involved with that portion of the world and the wild horses that live there. And he may be your best person to get a good answer for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Rock Springs Grazing Association, I'm just going to talk here for a minute because Chris wants me to find the video. And I don't know,
Okay.
Chris, if you can email me to that again really quick, the video that Hovind did for us. I'm searching my inbox. But the Rock Springs Grazing Association is made up of so few people that there are actually a lot of people in the town of Rock Springs itself who do love the horses around there. And if you've ever driven around Rock Springs, they have wild horse statues everywhere. I took a group of ladies out there last June and we were all taking pictures of the statues. They even have a restaurant right there in town, which is called the Wild Rose Mustang Restaurant or something like that. I mean,
Okay,
people
yeah,
do
yeah.
love them, but a lot of people in Rock Springs don't even know. Number one, strangely enough, they don't even know there's wild horses around town. But number
Mhm.
two, they just have no idea this roundup is going on for the most part.
Probably
And I
not,
think,
yeah.
yeah, if we were able to put, billboards up in town, which we could do through a fundraiser or something, and just let them know that that's happening.
Do you know what they're gonna take it down to, like what the
Salt Wells
AML is
Creek,
they're looking,
they're zeroing out Salt Wells Creek.
they're zeroing out, yeah. Yeah,
That's
and
their
that's,
plan. Yeah.
yeah,
Whether they get that done in July or whether they plan to drag it out or not, I don't know.
yeah.
But this zero out Salt Wells Creek, zero out nearby Divide Basin, which is, I know, one of Carol Walker's favorite areas. Reduce the Adobe Town HMA, which is also next door, by 60%. And there was also talk of zeroing out the White Mountain HMA, which is funny because Rock Springs promotes that HMA as the pilot, Wild Horse Pilot Butte Loop. They have signs all over town directing you to it. It's in their brochures that you can pick up in hotels.
Right.
But
And
I
what,
think the most recent resource management plan said that they might not be doing White Mountain. I'm just not sure yet.
hmm. Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure about this figure, but I think I'm right on this, that since the act was passed, the Wild Horse and Free Roaming Borough Act of 1971, which was a unanimous vote of Congress, can you imagine?
Right.
Unanimous, that it was the only issue that got more mail, snail mail back then, was the Vietnam War.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But what I was going to say is that since 1971, that act was supposed to protect wild horses where they currently live, where they currently stand. And even with that, BLM has zeroed out, meaning gotten rid of all the wild horses, and I think half of the HMAs since 1971.
Yep, they have. We started with approximately 329. That
Yes,
number will vary a little depending on who you talk
yes,
to, but we're down
yes.
to 165. And if they have their way, we'll be down to 162. And they also they're working on zeroing out the Caliente complex in Nevada as well, which is a combination of various HMAs. All
Yeah.
right, I'm just going to play this video for you guys really quick from Senator
Okay.
Hoeven that he sent to Chris. And then again, Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you.
I
What is this
really,
video of? What is this video?
Senator Hoeven sent a message about wild horses and how he
Okay.
supports them. Yeah,
Okay,
so I'm just
perfect.
going to play that really quick.
Okay.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to your conference. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. Our wild horses are an integral part of the history and visitor experience at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Importantly, this is the only U.S. national park named after an individual, so it makes sense we would honor the life and service of President Teddy Roosevelt by preserving this historic scene as he experienced it during his formative years in the Dakota Territory. That's why we've been working to maintain the wild horses at the park. To this end, we repeatedly raised this priority with officials at the National Park Service, securing commitments from key leaders to ensure a healthy and genetically viable herd over the long term. We continue working to make sure the Park Service is transparent and the public knows what the plans are for managing the herd. One critical part of our effort is the legislation that we passed as part of the annual funding bills directing the Park Service to maintain the wild horses, similar to Teddy Roosevelt's time as a rancher in the area. On a broader note, this is a great example of how I can leverage my position on the Senate Appropriations Committee to advance the interests of North Dakotans. The appropriations bills that I and my fellow committee members craft each year provide an opportunity to provide direction and influence decision-making at federal agencies like the National Park Service. By exercising our constitutional role to oversee annual discretionary funding at federal agencies, we can hold officials accountable, ensure they act in accordance with existing law, and withhold funds for activities that violate congressional intent. As I've discussed with wild horse advocates and stakeholders, I'll continue to use this position to make sure the Park Service follows through on its commitments. At the same time, we're working to get Governor Burgum confirmed as Interior Secretary. He had his first vote yesterday, and it went very well. We hope to have his confirmation completed today. Having Doug in this role will help ensure we have a long-term management plan that keeps a healthy, diverse herd of horses at the park for future generations to enjoy. Thank you to everyone gathered here today for your continued efforts in support of our wild horses at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Best wishes for an enjoyable and productive event.
I mean, how great is that? That
Pretty
video
great,
right there, you guys, is due to all the hard work that Chris has
Yes.
done. And if she can get a senator to not only know who she is when she calls, but be able to do a video, his love of wild horses is now due to Chris and her hard work. So we have to give all thanks to that. Chris, did you want to add something?
I want to just add that he is also a Republican. So this is not a Democratic issue. This is very much can be a bipartisan issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris reminds me about that all the time, you guys. So she's absolutely right. Okay, I'm gonna end here really quick. I did see a lot of questions in the chat box about how to find information that Cynthia was sharing regarding the numbers from the BLM. You can get that information at blm.gov. They haven't cut it out yet. I do expect them to at some point, but they haven't done it yet. And if you guys are interested, because we don't actually have anybody else telling you where to find that information or even how to search contracts that the helicopters are being paid. So maybe a few weeks after this summit, Chris will host me and we will do a little Zoom on how to find the information on blm.gov, how to search usaspending.gov for helicopter contracts. And that way you guys will have the additional information that you need when you meet with your legislators. So if you guys are interested in that, we'll get that done. All right. Thank you again, Cynthia. I'm so glad
Thanks.
you accepted our invitation to speak
Yeah,
today.
thanks,
We're
everybody.
very,
It was
very
great.
appreciative. Yep.
And best wishes on the rest of this conference. I know I've signed up for quite a few and excited about some of your other speakers coming up. So my pleasure, and thanks everybody for being here and for putting together the conference.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. And we'll see you soon for our next presentation. Thank you.